Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Rationally Speaking with me, Martin Turner, and my colleague Stuart Carrington. This is the show where we talk about rational emotive behaviour therapy, or REBT. We try to apply it to real-world cases, to sport and performance generally, and just kind of dip into theory every now and again. And today's one of those, probably, isn't it, Stu?
Yeah, I think so. I think although it's nice to talk about these like real examples or fictional examples that we've done in the past, sometimes we just want to touch upon the theory or talk about a concept within REBT that's really pertinent to what we're trying to apply.
100%. One of the things that you would read about if you study some REBT literature, or if you go and watch people speak about REBT, they will talk about this thing called emotional responsibility. And one of the reasons that I wanted to have a conversation with you about this is because it can be misconceived. Sometimes it feels as if we're kind of blaming the individual for their emotions when we use words like responsibility. But actually, we're trying to use it in a positive sense, I suppose, and try to arm people with tools and ideas to help them to regulate their emotion.
Yeah, this is one of these kind of misconceptions of REBT that I see get kind of thrown around a little bit. I think sometimes it can be misconstrued, but I can understand that kind of misconception that people think when you're talking about emotional responsibility and it's your perception. It's like someone saying, oh well, you're wrong to think about it like this, or it's your fault that you're feeling that way. And I think this is kind of a misrepresentation of Ellis's work. Ellis, acknowledged the impact of adverse events. He acknowledged that they contribute to those consequences. It's just that they're mediated by what we do in the middle, and that's the B aspect of the framework.
100%. And I think Dryden kind of continues that. And one of the things I took from Dryden's work, Dryden's writing, is how the adversity, the stimulus for the emotion, kind of flavors the emotion. When we talk about irrational beliefs in REBT, they don't really predict particular emotions. It's not that irrational beliefs emerge from the ether and then start to trigger anger or start to trigger anxiety. The A is normally in the room. A stimulus event happens. Something happens to you in your life. For example, anger is usually a misdemeanor against you or somebody you're close to. And this is using the work from people like Richard Lazarus, Wendy Dryden, obviously Albert Ellis. The appraisal theorists generally have a lot to say on this. So it's not saying that it's all your perception. You're making it up. We're saying that, no, you're contributing to the emotion. And because you're contributing to it, you have some responsibility over the emotion that you experience, and particularly how you express that emotion.
When you mentioned there previously about flavouring the consequence or flavouring the emotion, is this where we talk about like unhealthy and unhealthy anger? So that anger might be a natural result of the adversity, but the impact, like the consequences of that anger, are flavoured by your mediation. Is there more to it than that?
I think it's sort of the opposite in a way.
Okay.
So the flavour is the emotion type.
Right.
So say if we say the flavour of the emotion is anger, and then through irrational or rational beliefs, you then experience or express that anger in unhealthy or healthy ways.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's like, how is the situation appraised? So, for example, a perceived threat, perceived danger, generally linked to an anxiety emotion. Now, whether it's going to be healthy or unhealthy depends on the irrational or rational belief. That's what REBT has to say about it. Now, of course, we can go back a step to the A and think about inferred adversities. So you can shape your perception of an adversity before you get to the irrational or rational beliefs. And we can see that in lots of ways when we work with people. How they construe the situation often then links to their irrational belief. So I've just received a bad mark on my assessment. This is bad. This is going to take me away from where I want to be. This is bad for my career. And that's going to lead to some potential, some upset, maybe some anger. Now, whether it's unhealthy anger or healthy anger is then dictated by the irrational or rational belief. If I take that fail grade and then I say, and it's terrible and it's the end of the world, and that means I'm a complete loser and I can't stand it, then we're more likely to experience the unhealthy anger, or, it depends how bad it is, but potentially depression, unhealthy sadness. But actually, you can obviously do some work at the perception, at the inferential A part of that. So you could say, well, it's bad, it's the end of my career. You could change the perception of that to be more positive. Now, REBT tends not to do that because it kind of assumes that what the person is saying is true, that this is bad and this might affect their career negatively. Who am I as a practitioner to say the opposite to that? So we tend to assume that's true, assume the A is true, and then try to work on the B. However, obviously, if the A is inferred and perceived, then that still gives you room to work with the person. And yourself, actually, how you construe events and situations. And we've all been around people that just tend to see everything, see the positive in everything. And they tend to have more positively toned emotions and healthy and negative emotions. So this emotional responsibility for me is happening mainly at those two levels. It can happen at A in REBT, particularly specific REBT. It's mainly happening at B.
Let's talk about that emotional responsibility on two levels, because you said, you can take a step back from the beliefs and look at the adversity. Can we take a step back from the adversity and look at goals? So on what does the individual, I guess my question is, does the individual have a responsibility to set goals that aren't going to invite adversity?
Well, sure, and that's one of the most effective ways to regulate your emotion. It just so happens that it's not really an effective way to live life, because you could just scale back all of your goals so that you're never upset when things don't go well. In fact, your perception of things not going well is constrained because you're not hopeful that anything will go well anyway. You're not planning on doing things well. So yeah, you can constrain your life, constrain your you're kind of basically saying, I don't really want to achieve that much. So nothing is really going to be adverse to you in that context. Which is why I think that theoretically G has a part to play here, but sort of practically it doesn't. If that makes sense.
It does. I want to sort of kind of just challenge a little bit on that, because we talk about how REBT is flavoured by Stoicism, the capital S Stoicism, and I'm just wondering if we look at sort of classic Stoic writers and thinkers talking about your goal should be to live a good life or to be a good person. Socrates, killing himself because if I can't challenge things, if I can't think, there's just no point me being here. It's a little bit like that. It's a little bit of if I want to live a good life, so can we have a goal that's really valuable and worthwhile that perhaps doesn't look at just outcomes? And I guess a sporting example, just to perhaps be a bit more engaging to the listener, would be, if we have a tennis player, our goal, yes, we want to win, but then we might look at a performance goal rather than an outcome goal. So, I want to get X amount of my first serves in, or I want to make sure that I return 75% of my opponent's serves. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to win, but if I do those things, it probably makes me a bit more likely to. But it also means that I can succeed even if I don't win the outcome, because I would have got better as a player, which should be my goal.
100%. I mean, you can frame goals in a way that's obviously more useful for performance. We know the outcome performance process framework is very useful for us as sports psychologists. But my argument would be that having any goal opens you up to adversity. So my recommendation would be to have goals and to try to articulate the goals and shape them in a way that actually leads you towards contentment and fulfillment. But it doesn't matter how healthy your goal is. Just having one will mean you will face adversity. And then it's your responsibility, in part, to shape your emotion functionally towards that goal. So I've got a really healthy goal to do something. Say it's something philanthropic, or just a healthy, noble goal. Well, I'm going to face adversity to that goal because I'm fallible, I'm limited. The world is unpredictable, it's uncontrollable. So I can't have responsibility over that necessarily. I can make sure I don't walk into walls, or I can make sure I don't do anything stupid, but it's not always completely within my control. That kind of stuff just happens, So you've got some responsibility at that end, I can have some influence over my experience of A, whether I face it or not. And of course, you would want to construct your life so you're not just walking into walls and falling down potholes, But that is going to happen whether you like it or not. So for me, the ultimate emotion responsibility comes at B, because you can have 100% control over that B. Now, you can't stop the B from happening. If the irrational belief comes into your head, then it comes into your head. What you can then control and have responsibility over is if you let that belief reign over your other thoughts, if you let it, just take over your mindset, then that's a choice in my mind. You could say, well, I have to succeed at everything that I do, and it's terrible if I don't. Well, actually, is that belief helping me? Is it rational? Well, I want to succeed, but I don't have to, and it'd be bad if I didn't get what I wanted, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. You see what I mean? So it's like levels of control to me, which start to dictate the level of responsibility that we apply to the A and the B.
Yeah, there's lots of C words coming out here. I know. Yeah, I'm being very careful here. So you talked about choice, you talked about control. The one that pops into my mind hearing you talk there, Martin,
Carrington. Is it Carrington?
Carrington should always pop into your mind.
Yes.
Yeah, just on perhaps every 5 seconds.
Yeah.
But the other one that pops into my mind is contemplation. So Ellis speaks about this frequently. You mentioned there, and I love that, about how these beliefs pop into your head. I think sometimes people can almost have like meta disturbance of, oh, I should, my goal is to never feel unhappy. Then you have a thought that makes you feel unhappy, and then you feel unhappy that you felt that emotion because it's incongruent to your goal. Ellis was kind of very open-minded about this and very aware that, well, you know what, like sometimes I'm going to feel angry, sometimes I'm going to feel sad, pissed off, whatever it may be. But he challenged those, and he did that via contemplation. And then sometimes that contemplation was a very short period. So what am I thinking? Why am I feeling this? And then you can challenge your belief, because that is going to pop into your head. So it lasts a very short amount of time. And other times it might be a bit longer, and you might have to spend a little bit more time or investment challenging, contemplating that. But it would soon diminish. And I think that's kind of a real bedrock of REBT, that kind of acceptance, that self-acceptance, that occasionally I'm going to feel these things that aren't particularly pleasant, but I can tolerate it, I can stand it, and I'll come out. And what we see then is that kind of lower levels of emotional reactivity. Something that I'm seeing in research quite frequently now is that the fact that, well, it's not that I'm never going to feel these things, I just feel them less frequently. They don't last as long, and perhaps they're not as intense as they were before.
And they're functional.
Yeah.
The idea is they actually help me, even though they're unpleasant. They help me towards the thing that I want to achieve. And it comes back to your point on G. What do you want to achieve? Now, you're going to invite adversity no matter what you want to achieve, having any goal, but you better make sure your goals are set correctly. And in REBT, correctly would mean that they're kind of virtuous, for want of a better word, and that's something we can talk about another day. But kind of like a fundamental goal, something that will actually sustain you, and something that will lead to fulfillment and contentment. Or at least that's how I've taken Alice's work and framed it within my work, I would say. But I think that emotional responsibility. We're really saying you have a role to play in shaping your emotion and shaping the extent to which that emotion is healthy or unhealthy. That's where the responsibility is. It's not blaming you for the emotion you feel. It's not saying, well, you're angry and that's your fault for thinking the way that you do and believing the way that you do. It's just that we know we can shape our thoughts and beliefs. We don't have ultimate control over them, but we can shape them, we can challenge them, we can have that internal dialogue, which means you can have some responsibility over your emotions. And I think when people understand that and get that, it frees them up to do all sorts of things, because now you can take on challenges that you didn't want to take on before because of things were making you emotional. No, I couldn't do that. It makes me too anxious. But if you take emotional responsibility, you can say, well, yes, that thing potentially is anxiety provoking, but I have a role here. I have a part to play, which means I can experience my anxiety, as you said, Stu, maybe less intensely, maybe less frequently, but more importantly, I can experience it functionally. I can be in that unpleasantness, but actually function in this thing. I've got to give a public talk. Well, anxiety doesn't mean I won't do it. It just means I need to take some responsibility and make sure the anxiety helps me. What can I do? I can rehearse, I can prepare, I can take steps to make sure the anxiety doesn't dominate my performance. It's just that in REBT, when we talk about emotional responsibility, we're talking about shaping your own rational beliefs and not letting irrational beliefs take over your kind of emotions and behavior and therefore performance. So emotional responsibility is a great cognitive behavioral CBT type concept that fits really nicely into sports psychology. But in REBT, we would kind of direct that towards irrational and rational beliefs, really, wouldn't we?
And I guess from a coaching or psychologist perspective, this is what we want from our participants. We want them to feel empowered. We want them to promote individual responsibility and for them to think and act for themselves. But I guess by definition, then we have a little bit of responsibility to help guide those participants into that way of thinking. And
guide people around those participants, because one of the dangers of language like emotional responsibility is that stakeholders in, say, young athletes, their psychological well-being, their psychological approach to performance, who are the key stakeholders? Coaches, parents, sports psychologists, any support staff really is a stakeholder in that. What we're not saying is that it's that young person's complete responsibility to look after their own emotions and their own emotional reactivity, because that sends the message that, the coach can say what they want, they can do whatever they want, and if the child gets upset, it's not the coach's fault. That's a misconstrue of REBT. That's people who want to undercut REBT, assuming the worst, and saying, it must be that means this bad thing because I don't like REBT. Well, if you actually read REBT and listen to how people speak about it, who are actually trained and well read in this, it's not that at all. It's not about blame. Responsibility isn't blame. It's about saying, well, how can I help that young athlete to take more responsibility over their emotions? And how can I educate the people around the athlete to be considerate of that? But not to think they can just say and do whatever they want and it's the athlete's fault if they feel angry. And I think that's a fine balance, but it's one that you have to strike. Otherwise, you can go too far either way. You can't make the environment completely sanitized to protect athletes, but you can't just say, it's athletes' complete responsibility to take care of their own emotions. It's like everything, it's a balance and it's a mix. In the ideal world, absolutely, you would have 100% control over your emotions. You would get to decide how you feel and what you feel and when you feel it, but you don't.
Well, you'd also have, in an ideal world, you'd have 100% control over everything. You'd have 100% control over the environment, successes, failures. Yeah. And
even if you did, you wouldn't be a perfectly sort of unemotional robot, because that level of responsibility would start to become pressure and stress.
Good point.
So I think emotional responsibility, really key term in REBT. Something that is written about quite a bit, I would say, but needs to be demystified in a sense, and hopefully we've done something around that in this conversation.
I hope so, and it'd be great to hear from the listeners. I say listeners, I've used plural again there. I think we have one.
It's a big mistake.
We might have two, so it could be correct. But it'd be great, anyone that's listened to this, if that's helped clear that up, or if there's any other misconceptions or any other thoughts, please let us know. We'd love to discuss that.
100%. And we'll kind of cover more theoretical type stuff as we go, as well as coming back to real world cases. And we've got some great examples recently, actually, of things in the press that we could, kind of your spidey senses start being activated when you see certain quotes from managers. But I won't name names, but I think that will be our next recording.
Perfect. I'll look forward to that one.